Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Okay, welcome back to the Parenting Horizons podcast. That was my very formal introduction.
Love that.
Today we're going to talk about, this is kind of topical, we're going to talk about transitioning back to school for kids.
Right.
I mean, some of you your kids may already be back in school, but even if they've been in a couple of weeks, I think you can apply a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
So what would you say is the main thing, or one of the main things to keep in mind, parents to keep in mind as kids start this transition back to school? And I would imagine this is a transition like no other in years, because we're coming out of COVID and a lot of kids are going back to school for the first time in like a year and a half.
Right, exactly. No, it's very different this year, but as a standard, I tell parents to allow for a 6 to 8 week period of transition for their kids.
Why that longer time frame?
Well, I should also say this is for any kid in any grade, even if they've been in the school for 100 years.
Even like maybe kids that are going to college, high school, junior high,
100%.
elementary.
6 to 8 weeks of transition, which means also that as parents, we have to go through 6 to 8 weeks of transition. It's a standard amount. And if you think about it, there's a reason that generally puts the timeline between Halloween and Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And
that they might be adjusted.
Yeah, might
as
be.
much as possible.
Right. Might be. If you think about it, it's pretty standard for parent-teacher conferences to be after Halloween and before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Because even, the teachers are adjusting and everybody's getting to know each other and figuring out how this teacher's different from previous teachers, how this class configuration is different. What are the dynamics?
Friends, all of the friends that you're going to be in. Maybe you're in a different environment totally if you're starting a new school.
Exactly. And of course, the academics are different. They have to be if you're progressing through school. So everything is different, even though it may be technically the same school environment.
Right.
And I find it necessary, Greg, to tell parents this, because I think a lot of parents get weary during the summer.
Right.
And they're like, oh, good, the kids are going to go back to school.
Oh, so they think they're done. First day back in.
Exactly.
I'm free.
Yeah. But then the kids come home with emotions and, some of their behavior's dysregulated, and they're pushing back about homework, and they're pushing back about getting up, and pushing back about technology. And the parents are like, this was all supposed to be fixed.
Right. Well, you said even this week that you had to mention it to some parents in your groups, that It's a 6 to 8 week transition. And is that because parents are having expectation, that kind of expectation?
Precisely. Everybody needs to manage their expectations a little bit. And I feel especially this year is so complicated.
Right.
Because
it's a huge transition to come off not even just the practicality of doing school in your room on your computer for a year.
Right.
Right. I would think the transition is always difficult anyway. It's not like you said 6 to 8 weeks, because of the pandemic. You've always said 6 to 8 weeks.
Always.
And now we have this other thing layered on top of it, this sort of complex thing that kids are coming out of.
Right, exactly. And I'm kind of telling parents, not that they like to hear this, but that all bets are off this year. I don't know how long it's going to take kids to transition this year. I've kind of likened it to, if you've ever seen one of those signs science fiction movies, right? Where the astronauts go into space and they go into these little containers and they get sealed up and they're in stasis, right? Everything's just being monitored, and they fly for millions of light years away, and and it's 25, 30 years later, and they wake up in this new place.
Oh.
With no memory really of what happened before, but also it's a completely new life.
Right.
And I kind of
And you're saying this is kind of what that is like.
I kind of feel like kids have been in stasis.
Yeah, they really have. But it also just occurs to me with also the anxiety that it's not really over. It's not like COVID ended and they're going back to school. They're going back to school and still dealing with masks and still dealing with the possibility that, there could be another shutdown. So yeah, there's a ton going on with this transition.
There's a ton going on. And, socially they've been...
Right. Totally different.
It's been totally different. And part of that's going to remain different, because with masks on, we really can't read people's expressions.
Yeah.
So how are they going to read their classmates' expressions? Is that person looking at me and smiling, or is that person glaring at me, or is that person looking at me sideways? What's going on?
It's really, so it's funny because I'm in a class right now and we've been wearing masks. I've gone to it for about 3 weeks now, and we're wearing masks in class. But last night we all went out for a beer, and it was just really weird because it's like, oh, you're suddenly seeing their whole face. It's kind of like a whole different thing. You're right. You can't really read. People have a mask pulled up to their eyes, so.
No, the major way that we read facial expressions and recognize people even is really from the eyes down, not from the eyes up.
Right.
So, I've had this experience similar to yours, except not in a class, where, I got to know people, servers at restaurants or whatever, with masks on. And then when they didn't have to wear the masks, I didn't recognize them.
Oh, yeah. I'm not surprised by
I was like, oh, is that what you look like?
Right.
Holy cow.
So this is just another layer that kids are sort of...
Exactly.
I'm getting anxiety just listening to you, realizing how much extra stuff... Because, the transition's tricky anyway.
Exactly.
If none of this stuff
Every year
was
it's
on.
tricky.
Right.
And this year it's going to be especially tricky.
So you're working to manage parents' expectations like in this past week?
Oh, yes. Every single person, whether it's in a group or whether it's private, everybody.
You mean they're frustrated that they're not getting, like, why is this happening, or why aren't they getting this quicker, and they seem undone and...
Exactly. I feel like what parents need is 2 extra tablespoons of patience. Or maybe 2 extra cups of patience.
Yeah, maybe cups.
Or gallons or something. But they need, if you can manage your expectations and understand that the behaviors that your kids come home with may be all over the place for 6 to 8 weeks. So sometimes in years previous, a parent will say after 3 weeks of school, oh my gosh, my kid was doing so great and now they're crashing and burning, but they were having such a great year for 3 weeks. And I'm like, 6 to 8 weeks.
Right. There's going to be ups and downs, you mean?
Expect the unexpected. You have to.
Right.
Otherwise, you're not going to be empathetic with your child. And that is the least effective way to parent.
What is the least effective? Everyone get your pens out. She's going to tell us the least effective way to parent.
The least effective way. Maybe there's a lot of
okay, one of the least effective ways to parent.
You. There you go. One of the least effective ways to parent is when you are not empathetic to what your child is going through.
Great. You're going to do your listening quote today for me, but not till we get to communication. I'm going to say that.
Okay.
So you have sort of 4 points that we can sort of discuss to help parents deal with their kids in this transition back to school. The first one is keep a good attitude yourself, which it sort of seems like you've almost touched on that. And when you say 2 cups of patience, it sort of seems maybe with your kids, but also with yourself.
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think you're right. We have to be patient with ourselves, too. And what I mean by keep a good attitude, there's the obvious probably that, you want to be positive and, expect the unexpected, but also, add hope in there that that they're going to be okay and everybody's going to manage. But also sometimes parents overlay their own school experience on their kids for positive and negative. So a parent can say, you're going to love school. I loved school. This was so great. This grade was so great. And that completely negates whatever the own child's feelings are going to be.
Right.
The opposite is also true, Look, school isn't fun, but you got to do it. So,
Right.
Get your backpack on and go to school. Neither is good.
Sure.
We have to let our kids have their own experiences and think positively about what their path is.
Right, what their experience is. So we're kind of getting into the second point, which is keep the lines of communication open. And this gets back to something we've probably covered. We probably have even touched on it in almost every episode in terms of how you communicate. Because you were already doing a couple of communication blocks just then. And we did a whole episode on communication blocks. If you haven't listened to that one, you should. But if we're going to be, if the idea is, if the circumstances or if the idea what we're talking about is the going back to school, how should you communicate with your kids about it? I mean, already you said, some of the parenting blocks you've mentioned that can come up, communication blocks, being commanding, which you did a little bit, like, you're going to love this. Just put your backpack on and go for it. It'll be great.
Right, exactly.
Advice giving.
Yeah, well, advice giving is really easy to slip in there because your kid comes home and they've got homework for the first time, but they're, used to having a gazillion hours of tech time, technology time, and they're on their screen, and you say to them, you need to get off of your screens and do your homework.
This is how you should do it.
This
right.
is how
That's
you should
very
do
commanding. Or like, hey, this is how I think you should handle it.
Right, exactly.
Right.
I mean, you can combine all of these to be just rich gems of blockage.
Yeah, totally. And I think, the other ones you mentioned are distracting, which isn't a good one. Like if they're upset about going back to school, you're like, hey, let's go get some ice cream, or hey, let's go get go to the movies.
Right.
Sarcasm, which is one of my favorites. I'm terrible at that communication block. But the main thing to take away from all of these, even as you're talking about them, is it sounds like you're not in tune to the child's experience.
Right,
when you're using
exactly.
these.
And I want to mention one more because it's one more communication block, because it's one that often slips under everybody's radar because we think we're doing it right. It just seems so natural. And that is interrogating. So, and interrogating can be as simple as your kid comes home and you say, how was your day? What'd you do today? What subjects did you have today? And not even peppering them with questions, but just
And why is that?
one question.
Because instinctively you want to do that. So why is that can be destructive or just not helpful, you think?
Well, for a number of reasons. One reason is that after a long day where you've had to manage your feelings and you've had to use your brain and you've had to navigate dynamics with teachers and your peers, the last thing that you really want to do is have somebody ask you a question about how your day was. It's like, just go away. And that's where parents get, they say, how was your day? And the kid says, fine.
Right.
And parents are like, I don't ever get any information because you've actually blocked communication. And the kid's telling you when they say, fine, they're telling you,
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Well, what do you
overwhelmed.
But what do you, okay, that makes sense. I get it. But what if do you just let it go then? Like, what if you want to get some understanding of that experience? Do you wait for them? Or you're out of luck. If they don't want to talk about it, you don't get to talk about it.
No, here's where we go back to, and I feel like we can't emphasize this enough. Your kid's already telling you. Because all behavior is communication. So your kid comes home and their shoulders are slouched and they drop their backpack in the middle of the hallway and they shuffle off to their room or whatever. That's one type of communication. I mean, it's one, they're communicating something.
Oh, yeah. No, you're getting something very specific from
Yeah,
that, even if they're not verbalizing it.
completely, and or they come in and they're skipping and, upbeat and vibrant. You don't have to say, how was your day? And interrogate them. You can say, looks like you had a pretty good day.
Right.
Or you seem a little down, but then drop it.
Right.
Right.
Well, you talk often a lot about, that sounds like you're being curious. You talk a lot about.
Exactly. And it's part of being tuned in to your child, which, is part of how to make this transition, as smooth as possible, is that being tuned in means being aware of what the nonverbal communication is that your child is giving you, and being patient and willing to kind of wait for it to come out. A mom said to me just today, she picked her kid up and they were in the car and the kid was just kind of unusually quiet. But rather than saying, what's going on, the mom said, you seem really, really quiet today.
Mm-hmm.
And the daughter didn't say anything, and mom just drove a little bit longer. And then mom said, I'm here if you want to talk about anything. And then they drove a little bit longer. And finally, the daughter began to talk about her day because she'd been given the open door to talk about it.
As I'm listening to you, maybe this feels obvious, but I think we have the impulse to rush. So she didn't feel pressed. Because the mom didn't press her, so she didn't feel she had to retreat. But it sounded like she dropped these kind of like open invitation things, to see if she would respond. And a lot of times it feels like we've talked about this in the past too. Like if you just kind of put it out there and leave it there, like this sort of curiosity, whatever it is. Hey, you seem kind of quiet today. Why are you quiet? And instead of going into like, did you have a bad day? Did someone say something to you? Were they rude? Are you tired?
Yeah.
Right? Is that the idea?
That's the idea. My daughter has a really good analogy for it, for when she's working with parents of neurodiverse kids. She says, imagine it like this. You've had a long day at work, right? You come home from work, and instead of your spouse or partner saying, I missed you, or I love you, or it's good to see you, instead they say, what happened at work today? Did that deal go through that you were doing? By the way, did you remember to drop off the laundry on the way to work? And don't forget, you're responsible for putting the kids to bed.
No one likes to hear that.
What are we having for dinner? It's like,
no, I will kill you.
Exactly. So we have to remember to give. I thought that was such a good way to frame it so that adults kind of get it in the adult context, if that were to happen. It's the same for kids, but maybe even more overwhelming for them.
Right. Well, and this year it's going to be even more overwhelming for sure.
I think so. Yeah.
And hard for them to sort of grasp it. As you're talking, and maybe because we were going to do this episode, so my 13-year-old is starting back on the 13th, and like 2 days ago she said, oh my God, I hate school. I can't believe it's starting. I hate school. I don't want to go to school. And it was very difficult because I really wanted to go, well, you don't hate school. What are you talking about? You love school. School's great.
Yes.
But I didn't. I didn't say anything. But then I maybe said something small. But again, because we're doing this and we were doing this episode, I started thinking like, oh, wait a second. So what's underneath that? Because I know she doesn't hate school, but maybe she has some anxiety about school. So I don't know if like the day passed. Or 2 days maybe even passed, and I think at some point I had an opportunity where it wasn't like weird or forced, that I was like, how are you feeling about going back on Monday? I think that idea of like, let me just throw this out there.
Yeah.
And I've experienced this with all three of my kids, that sort of light touch, then suddenly the floodgates open.
Yes.
About what might be bothering them, if there is something there that's underneath that sort of, because again, I know she doesn't hate school, but that's probably covering some anxiety of like, going back. And I think it was.
Right. Oh, yeah, 100%. And you did great. You don't want to you don't want to negate your child's feelings,
Right.
And I think kind of resonating for me is the episode that we did where we talked about being able to tolerate their uncomfortable feelings and
Right.
their negative expression of those uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah, that feels like a big one, and something that feels like even the parents maybe you're dealing with were not patient enough with. Like, come on,
Mm-hmm.
come on.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, you got this. You're still upset. You're still bothered. You're still nervous. You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
We talk about that one a lot, is sort of sitting through that with them. And it's hard, especially when it's your kid and they seem like they're struggling, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
I think the idea is to sit through that struggle with them, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can also kind of commiserate and say, I know, I get it. This is kind of a big transition, especially this year. You know, you're not validating the I hate school part. That's just code for feelings.
Hmm.
And that's another thing that I think parents have to remember is that kids speak in code.
What do you mean?
So when they say, I hate this or I hate that, that's code for feelings. Or
Yeah, I mean, I don't do that well, but that time I did. Like, I
Yeah,
didn't
you
say anything
did.
back, and I tried to think of like, oh, wait a second, because I know she doesn't hate school. And it wasn't even that big a leap. I was like, well, she's probably has some anxiety about going back. And that's the
Exactly.
idea, right? There's something underneath that.
Exactly. And you have to, I hate school is like it's like they're stating a fact.
Hmm.
And we want to argue with that fact because
Right.
we don't think that fact is accurate.
Sure.
Right.
Communication block.
Yeah, right. And instead of seeing it as a fact, we need to see it as a feeling. So that's what I mean by code. They code their feelings as if they're facts. I hate that, or I had the worst day, or I'm never going back to school again. I mean, it could be anything, but it's all code for a feeling that's going on inside of them. And really being attuned to your child is being able to, even if it's not in that moment, but being able to think it through and ask yourself as the parent, what feelings might underlie that? What does it seem reasonable? Like you did a great job with that. You thought about it. You didn't say you don't hate school. That's ridiculous. You didn't argue with that. And you just thought, you know what? I bet she's probably a little nervous. Why wouldn't she? I think they're all going to be nervous.
Definitely. I mean, the other thing that occurs to me as you're talking, and something you've mentioned before too, which I think is sort of a challenge for myself and other parents, and it goes back to this idea of patience, but taking time, because I think you've said before, like, not everything is a 5-alarm fire.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in there? Because it sort of feels like
Mm-hmm.
when your kid says this, you don't have to necessarily feel them in that moment to jump in and fix it and negate it, which is
Right.
not good anyway. That, like you said, unless like they're injured, you know,
Yes.
they're about to fall off the cliff, you can take some time and think about what you want to say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls for us as parents is that when our children speak in extremes, I hate that, or I'm miserable, or I don't have any friends, you know, all of which we might hear at some point, especially in the transition to school. I think the intensity that they are using to express themselves, we have a tendency to try to match that intensity.
Mm-hmm.
And that causes us to react as if it's an emergency because it feels, they're
Right.
expressing it as if there's, an
Because
oncoming
they're
truck.
operating in extremes.
Precisely. And so if we underreact, and I'm such a big believer in underreacting, if we underreact, we give ourselves the time as parents to think about it, as you did, and to ask, what is the most effective way for me to handle this?
So it seems like one of the overreaching things here is how we communicate with the child in any situation, but this is particular to this transition, how we listen to them, how we be curious, just because it's one of my favorite quotes that you mention a lot is like, what is the quote about listening and how we listening with heart? I'm not sure. Is it Brenda Ullin?
Yes, probably. I have a couple of quotes about
Let's hear
listening
them.
that
They're
I
always good to
love.
hear.
Well, Brenda Euland says that the value in listening to somebody else is that it draws that person closer to you. That when we are listened to, we feel close to that person who's doing the listening. She says that within that process of listening, ideas begin to come to life and to grow and to expand. And most importantly, in my opinion, she says listening recreates both people. And so what that said to me as a mom, we make all these mistakes with our kids. We try to make as few as possible, but we're going to make mistakes. But when we make a mistake, we can redeem that mistake. We can recreate ourselves, our child, and the relationship if we simply sit down and listen. And I feel like that's so powerful to know that mistakes can be redeemed by something as simple as just really listening without judgment or criticism.
Right. So if a parent has done a communication block or shut them down in some way, had not been curious and want to draw them out, there's a chance to sort of circle back. And it's funny when you say
Sure.
ideas, because that's the idea is like, I think ideally you are creating space for the child to hopefully communicate to you, and in collaboration with them,
Yeah.
you're coming up with strategies to deal with whatever they might be feeling, some anxiety about going back to school, a friendship group that is broken down, their nerves about trying out for the team. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it is 100%. I mean, I feel like one of our biggest responsibilities as parents is to support our children in their growth. And if we shut them down, if we fail to listen, then that whole collaborative process that you're talking about just goes away. And then there is no support. So I feel like, the key to all of that is the listening process. Another of my favorite quotes is by Stephen Covey, who says, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood."
Great.
And I love, again, this is something that it's so simple and it's so profound, and we don't do it.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like the simplest and most profound things are the ones you need to be reminded about. I mean,
Yeah.
I always try to think about, you say be curious a lot. Like I'd almost put it on a t-shirt when we open our Parent Horizons podcast store.
Okay, I'm in. Yeah.
Be curious. That's what I kind of always remember. Like, don't tell her what to do. Don't insist on your point of view. Don't diminish it. Be curious, be curious, be curious. And I think that's a simple way of what we're kind of talking about here. So it opens up this opening dialogue, which we've talked in other episodes about other circumstances. But I think this whole thing, this whole transition back to school, especially with COVID and everything that's going on more than ever. Well, also, I feel like you would say that you have a much better chance of getting the child to communicate with you if you're coming from that point of view.
For sure.
To listen first, then be understood.
Exactly. And that, I mean, as you said, that's really hard to do. It's really hard to be curious when we are afraid. And I think this school year particularly holds a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, parents. I think we're concerned about kind of what happened to the kids this past.
Oh, right. There's been a lot of like, are they falling behind and expectations? And
right.
I hope people listen to some previous episodes because we talked a lot about sort of readjusting what that means given what we've all gone through.
For sure. For sure. And I think the other thing besides lack of empathy that gets in the way of effective parenting is when we're afraid as parents.
Well, that can be part of keep a good attitude about yourself. That part about being, how do you look to yourself? So it's not just about the child, but with yourself, if you can recognize, because that fear is going to drive all sorts of communication blocks.
Oh yeah, and it just colors even the way that you see your child's experience. So they could be, doing stuff that's completely typical for their age, right? Having their first little romance or being independent and going out by themselves or whatever. But if you're fearful, that gets colored. And the tendency is to see that experience not as typical, but as abnormal.
Mm.
And then it can turn into even pathologizing your child's behaviors.
Right, which becomes totally confusing for them then, right? Because something that's sort of a natural, whether it's, your 7th grade, I mean, I'm going through it now with like some romance stuff that's going on that's things that are kind of totally natural for that moment.
Mhm.
And you might still have I'm working through that now too, is have an opportunity to kind of how I get to communicate with her about it without shutting it down and making her feel like, oh, this is wrong. I'm doing something wrong.
Exactly. So, part of parenting effectively and when well during this time, well, and maybe all times, is getting clear about where we are, what our feelings are moving through the world.
Right.
Our feelings about our own circumstances, but also our feelings about our kids' circumstances. And are you coloring it?
Right.
In a way that's negative as opposed to normal or even positive.
I mean, this is another thing I think we talk about a lot, is that it's not just one way with the kid. It's like important to check in with yourself. We talk about that a lot too. Is where am I at in this? Taking the time to sort of think about that so you can come together. It's this sort of collaboration about how do we deal with this transition, the anxieties that come up with it. I just want to touch on 2 more things before we wrap it up. What you have on your list is be perceptive, which I think we've sort of already covered. The idea being that it's not just necessarily verbal. When you say be perceptive, it might be something they're saying, how they're acting, facial expressions. Is that the idea when you say be perceptive?
Yeah, it is. And it's really paying attention not just to whatever words might come out of their mouth or not come out of their mouth. If you've got a teenager, very few words will come out. But it's really paying attention to the body language, paying attention to the greater part of what's being communicated to you. We've said before, body language is 55% of communication. So what is that?
Especially with teenagers, right? That's what you're saying. You're not going to get a verbal onslaught of their day.
What's funny, Greg, is it's almost like bookends, because if infants can't communicate verbally,
right,
all we do is pay attention to their body language to see how they're doing. We have to. There's no words, right? Then somehow we lose it in the middle when kids start to talk, and we're like, oh, good, you can talk, so I don't have to pay attention to body language. But then the bookend to that is when they become teenagers and they stop talking again. Only this time it's deliberate. It's not because they can't talk, but it's because they don't want to talk to us.
Right.
And yet the solution remains the same for those bookends. We look at the body language.
Sure.
We look at the facial expression. We hear the tone, and we're able to interpret them.
Yeah. I have a 21-year-old that, he came in the house the other night and flopped on the couch and doesn't, I mean, can definitely talk, but didn't say a word. But I knew within moments of like, he's not doing great. I could just tell by the way he came in, the way he looked. I mean, and that's what you're kind of talking about.
Yeah, that's being perceptive.
Right.
Is really taking those visual cues and, hearing your child really through your eyes as opposed to just your ears.
Okay, so the last one you have is give your child a reasonable amount of control. And when it comes to this transition, I mean, I'm guessing you're saying that because for anyone with anxiety, I think if you have some semblance of ownership of it, then maybe it lessens it. Is that the idea? Like, how does that play out for you when you say to parents, in order to help with this transition, give your child a reasonable amount of control?
Well, I think, control or power is something that is a basic human need. Everybody needs power and control. They need to feel like that the universe is not chaotic. And in a time of transition, that chaotic feeling can be even magnified to the degree that it feels like you're part of the chaos. So giving the child a reasonable amount of control, and we can talk about what that reasonable part of it means, but giving your child an amount of control diminishes the chaos for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting that human need met so that they don't have to either spin out
Right.
or become over controlling or seek power in abusive or risky ways.
Sure. Because it can play, that makes sense. That it could play out negatively, like say at school or something, where they're reaching for control in another way. Like maybe with teens, it could be drugs and alcohol, or even tweens.
Sure.
Or, I mean, in relationships, social dynamics. So that makes total sense. And one of the things you've mentioned is, if you wanted to give a concrete example of this, and again, it comes back to like a collaborative communication. You gave the example of if the child has to be at school at 8:30, instead of you saying, hey, you need to get up at 7 and do A, B, and C and do this by this time so you can leave at 7:30, you would say what?
I would say, well, and here's where I want to talk about a reasonable amount. That word, the amount of control that can be given to a child is going to depend upon their developmental level.
Sure.
So you're going to want to frame it very differently if you've got an elementary aged kid versus if you've got a tween or teen. So let's just start. If you have an elementary age kid, there are always choices within choices. They can't control their bedtime.
Sure.
Right? That's not reasonable. But they can control how the routine leading up to the bedtime might look.
Right.
Do they want to take a bath first or read books first? Do they want to lay out their clothes for school first? Or do they want to say goodnight to the family first? So you can give them small choices.
Yeah, I'm thinking, again, I keep bringing up my 13-year-old, but the phone got sort of out of control during the summer. There were nights where she had it in her room at night, and we've talked to her and said, you can't have your phone in your room at night anymore when you go to bed. So there's got to be a time that you plug it in outside of your room in the office. And we've already begun to have that conversation and have tried to, it just seems like this is another example of that, where it's happening. Like she doesn't get to decide. It's not a either or, like this is happening, but what works for you? What time, how long do you feel you need before you go to bed that you want to check your phone?
Precisely.
Is that the idea?
Precisely. And if we look at the morning, which you just mentioned, instead of you as the parent structuring it, you can say, we have to leave the house by 7:30 to get to school on time. How do you want to handle your morning? Right. How much time do you need to get ready? How much time do you need to brush your teeth? How much time do you need? And then work backwards from there.
Well, and you also talk often about then if those things don't work, you do a revisit. It's like an opportunity to come back to it because it might fail if they're involved and they're how they decide they want it to go is not working. You can then come back to it and say, hey, we need to talk about this again.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And, at the end of the day, as parents, we always have the right to set limits if the child isn't cooperating in terms of the limits that they would within the choices that you're giving them. So we always have that opportunity to say, look, if, this doesn't seem to be working, you've been late to school for 80 days in a row. So, and I wouldn't let it go that long.
Sure.
For all 5 days of the 5 days that you've been in school. And so we need to either come up with another plan together or mom and dad will make the plan for this next week and here's what it's going to look like and we'll see how that goes. And then we can work within both frameworks and see what's going to be the best for you.
Yeah. And again, it sounds like you've said this in the past too, that if they have some ownership over how these things occur, whether it's bedtime, and like you said, there's choices within the choice. It's not like they're going to determine their bedtime, but if they have some ownership over these decisions, there's a higher chance of it actually going. But that's true of anything, though. If you feel like you're not just being told what to do, you have no say, this has been sort of put down on you, that you're it's probably going to be more successful.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, when you don't have a say, the chaos increases. because you don't feel in control of anything. And so it feels chaotic. Everybody's controlling you. The world is you become the victim in terms of the world's imposition of structure, routine.
Yeah. I mean, and
whatever.
now it's more than ever because, like you said, they're coming off of summer where they pretty much had so much freedom, and now there's so little, and they don't get to determine their schedule or what time they leave, or, you know, kids who have to wear a school uniform, you know, like now. So more than ever, they're losing like control. Right?
Exactly. And let's layer on to that the ongoing pandemic, which also feels chaotic. I mean, you know, we thought we were going to go into summer and yay us, and it was going to be that, you know, by the end of the summer, everything was going to be what? Normal? I don't know. But obviously with, you know, we've got the Delta variant, obviously we've got the Mu variant now. It's
Yeah, this is ongoing.
And so I think one of the things that kids are going to be facing is they're going to be going back to school, but will it be every day? I mean, or will a school, you know, when a certain number of COVID cases rises again, they're going to shut it down?
Right. There's a lot of uncertainty for sure.
Right. Which contributes to this feeling of chaos and danger.
Right.
So the more you can give your child appropriate control, the more they feel like they've got appropriate power. They don't feel so, you know, battered by the weather, you know, around them.
So can we just wrap up? Like, we don't need to recap everything, but if there was sort of one main thing you want parents to keep in mind as we sort of enter this transition, what would it be?
6 to 8 weeks of transition plus whatever this pandemic is going to lay on it. So expect for it to be up and down, be patient with yourself, and be patient with your kids, and be empathetic to yourself and to your kids. You know, this is not easy. There's not some magic wand we can wave and make it easy. So patience, manage your expectations, and expect at least 6 to 8 weeks of transition. Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.